As the last pieces of wood from my cabin tumbled down toward the lake, I watched the triumphant smile spread across the overly made-up face of our HOA queen and her posse of followers applauding. They thought they'd won this battle. What they didn't know was that I had been silently documenting everything, every threat, every action. Where are you watching this video from? Drop a comment below. A position of power usually comes with responsibility, but sometimes it also comes with the opportunity to teach bullies a lesson. And trust me, when you pick the wrong person to mess with, the consequences can become incredibly interesting. The battle had only just begun, and they had no idea what was waiting for them. I remember the day I decided to build the cabin as if it were yesterday. 3 years after losing my wife, Claire, to cancer, I was finally ready to fulfill the promise I'd made to her. "One day, Matthew," she'd said during one of her better days in treatment, "we'll build that little cabin by the lake where Lily can grow up watching sunsets just like we did when we first met." She never got to see that dream realized, but I was determined to make it happen for our daughter. As the land permit director for the county, a position I'd held for 15 years, I knew exactly how to do everything by the book. I carefully filed all the proper permits, checked property lines twice, and made sure every single requirement was met. The land by the small, peaceful lake adjacent to our main property was perfect. Quiet, beautiful, and technically outside the Whispering Pines Estate's HOA jurisdiction, though I knew they wouldn't see it that way. The day we broke ground was special. 12-year-old Lily, my artistic and wise beyond her years daughter, wore her mom's old gardening hat and ceremoniously shoveled the first bit of dirt. "Mom would love this, Dad," she said with that smile that always reminded me of Claire. We had invited just a few close friends. George Edwards, the 65-year-old former county commissioner who now ran the local hardware store and had given me my first job in government, and Jessica Morgan, my neighbor and a real estate attorney who lived in the adjacent neighborhood. It was a perfect spring day, with just enough of a breeze to keep the bugs away. We had just laid out the foundation markers when I spotted her approaching, Amber Patterson, 38 years old, the HOA president of Whispering Pines, wearing what appeared to be a knockoff designer jacket, paired with impractical high-heeled boots, completely unsuitable for walking near a lakeside construction site. "What exactly do you think you're doing, Matthew?" she called out, not bothering with pleasantries. The oversized sunglasses perched on her nose couldn't hide the disapproval radiating from her face. Her bottle-blonde hair with dark roots swayed as she tapped her foot impatiently on the ground. "This is clearly against HOA regulations. Section 23.4 specifically states that all construction must be approved by the board, which, as you know, means me." Behind me, I heard George snort quietly. Amber had a reputation in the community. Former middle manager at a large real estate firm until her controlling attitude got her fired. Now she channeled all that energy into micromanaging our neighborhood as if it were her personal kingdom. "Actually, Amber," I replied calmly, "this parcel is outside the HOA boundary. I've checked the original county survey maps. But even if it weren't, I've secured all the—" I held up my folder of paperwork, knowing full well that as the county's land permit director, I had done everything meticulously correct. The next day, I wasn't surprised to find an HOA violation notice in my mailbox, demanding I cease construction immediately or face fines of up to $500 per day. I tossed it in my recycling bin without a second thought. What did surprise me was the emergency HOA meeting Amber called 3 days later, where she described my modest cabin project as a threat to our community's property values and an eyesore that will destroy the carefully maintained aesthetic of Whispering Pines. I attended the meeting, trying to maintain my professionalism despite the absurdity of it all. The cabin is being built to code with natural materials that blend with the environment. It's a small, tasteful structure on my own property, I explained to the room of about 20 neighbors. Some nodded in agreement. Others, clearly Amber's devoted followers, scowled. Brett Wilson, Amber's 48-year-old deputy and owner of a local gym chain, stood up beside her, arms crossed over his chest. "Rules are rules, Matthew. Just because you work for the county doesn't mean you're above them." The meeting devolved from there, with Amber declaring she would use all necessary measures to stop my project. As I walked out, Jessica caught up with me in the parking lot. "Matthew, I don't like the sound of that. Amber has a reputation for taking things too far." I appreciated her concern, but wasn't worried. What can she really do? I have all the permits. The property is legally mine. The cabin meets every code requirement. Jessica didn't look convinced. "Just be careful. That woman has made enemies of half the neighborhood already." A week later, I understood what Jessica meant when I received a formal letter from a law firm representing the HOA, threatening litigation for multiple violations. The signature at the bottom belonged to Scott Patterson, Amber's husband and partner at his corporate law firm. This was no longer just neighborhood politics. This was personal. The war had officially begun. The certified letter from Scott Patterson's law firm sat on my kitchen counter like a loaded gun. Lily picked it up one morning before school, her curious eyes scanning the official letterhead. "Dad, is this about our cabin?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I took the letter from her hands and placed it back on the counter, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Yes, honey, but don't worry about it. Some people just don't understand how important this cabin is to us." I kissed the top of her head and handed her the lunch I'd packed. "Remember what Mom always said? Don't let the turkeys get you down." That got a smile from her as she headed out to catch the bus. Once alone, I let out the frustrated sigh I'd been holding in. The letter contained thinly veiled threats about encroachment on established aesthetic guidelines and preparing for immediate injunctive relief. These legal phrases were meant to intimidate, but they only strengthened my resolve. That afternoon, I met with Jessica at her office downtown. The walls were lined with law books and framed diplomas, a testament to her expertise in real estate law. "This is harassment, plain and simple," she said after reviewing the letter and my property documents. "Your land extends beyond the HOA boundary according to the original plat maps. Amber is overreaching." She pushed her glasses up on her nose and leaned forward. "But Matthew, you need to understand something. HOAs have a lot of power, even when they're wrong, and Amber seems determined to make an example of you." I nodded, understanding the subtext. "Because I've never shown fear of her like the others do." Jessica smiled wryly. "Exactly. You're the first person who hasn't backed down. In her mind, that makes you dangerous." We discussed options, deciding that I would continue construction, while Jessica prepared counter-arguments to any legal action they might take. As I was leaving, Jessica added one more thing. "Document everything, Matthew. Every conversation, every letter, every step of the construction. We might need it." Following her advice, I installed security cameras around the construction site and continued work on the cabin's foundation. George helped me source quality lumber at a discount, and we made steady progress over the next few weeks. Meanwhile, Amber's campaign of harassment escalated. She began calling the county offices almost daily, reporting non-existent code violations. My colleagues would roll their eyes and tell me about it over lunch. She called again, claiming your foundation is 6 inches too close to the water. Maxwell Thompson, my 52-year-old direct supervisor at the planning department, informed me one day. I told her, "We've already inspected and approved it twice." I appreciated Max's support, but I could see the toll these constant complaints were taking on the department. During one of my routine inspections for another property, I happened to notice something interesting. Brett Wilson, Amber's right-hand man in the HOA, had an unpermitted swimming pool in his backyard. I made a note of it, but didn't file a report. I still wanted to resolve this situation peacefully if possible. The following Tuesday, I had to attend an all-day training session at the county office. Lily had stayed home from school with a mild fever. Around noon, I received a frantic call from her. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson is here with Mr. Wilson and some other people. They're trying to inspect our backyard and the lake area. I told them you weren't home, but they won't leave." I immediately excused myself from the training and called Jessica on my way to the car. "I'm heading there now, but can you meet me? This is trespassing." When I arrived home 15 minutes later, Amber and her entourage were still there, standing at the edge of my property, peering toward the lake and the half-finished cabin foundation. Lily was watching anxiously from the kitchen window. "What do you think you're doing on my property?" I demanded, my voice steady but firm. Amber turned, not even having the decency to look embarrassed. "Conducting an HOA inspection, it's within our rights." "Not without notice, not without my presence, and definitely not on property outside your jurisdiction," I countered. Brett stepped forward, his gym owner physique meant to intimidate. "We've received complaints about your construction project." I looked around pointedly. "From whom?" "There are no neighbors for 100 yards in that direction." Amber's eyes narrowed behind her oversized sunglasses. "Your daughter was very rude to us, Matthew. Perhaps you should teach her some respect for authority." That was it. I could handle their harassment of me, but bringing my daughter into it crossed a line. My daughter knows to be wary of trespassers. "Now get off my property before I call the sheriff and file for a restraining order. Jessica's car pulled up just then, adding weight to my threat. Amber glanced between us, then gestured to her group. "Let's go, we've seen enough." As they retreated, I heard her mutter, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." Later that evening, after tucking Lily into bed with a chapter of her favorite book, I found her unusually quiet. "Dad," she finally said, "Mrs. Patterson said some mean things about you today. She said you think you're above the rules and that you're going to get in trouble at work." I sat on the edge of her bed, my heart aching. "Honey, sometimes adults say unkind things when they don't get their way. Mrs. Patterson is upset because I'm not letting her tell us what to do with our property. But I promise you, everything I'm doing is completely legal." Lily nodded, but I could see she was still worried. "Is she going to stop us from building Mom's cabin?" The vulnerability in her voice nearly broke me. "No," I said firmly, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "Nobody is going to stop us from keeping our promise to Mom. Some things are worth fighting for, and this is one of them." At the next HOA meeting, I confronted Amber directly, keeping my voice level despite my anger. "Stay away from my daughter. Whatever issue you have with me, you keep it with me." The room fell silent, watching the standoff. Amber smirked, tapping her pen against the podium. "Is that a threat, Mr. Miller? Because I have connections with several county board members. It would be a shame if your professional judgment came into question." The implied threat to my job hung in the air. I simply smiled back. "I've been enforcing land use regulations fairly for 15 years, Amber. My record speaks for itself." As I left the meeting, Olivia Stewart, a 41-year-old elementary school teacher and reluctant HOA member, caught up with me. "I'm sorry about all this, Matthew. Not everyone agrees with how she's handling things." I nodded appreciatively, but I was beginning to realize that this conflict was going to get worse before it got better. The following day at work, I discovered that someone had accessed my file on the cabin project and altered some of the measurements in the documentation, changes that would make it appear as if I'd violated setback requirements. The security logs showed the files had been accessed using Maxwell Thompson's credentials, though he denied doing it. Someone had either hacked the system or pressured him into it. That night, returning home late after sorting out the file tampering, I found my construction materials vandalized. Bags of cement slashed open, exposed to the rain, and expensive lumber damaged. The security cameras had been mysteriously disabled. Standing in the rain, looking at the destruction, I felt a cold anger settle over me. If this was how they wanted to play, then the gloves were coming off. The morning after discovering the vandalism, I drove to the hardware store before work. George Edwards was already there, brewing coffee behind the counter. As I recounted the vandalism, his weathered face darkened. "Never did like that HOA crowd," he muttered. "What are you going to do?" I considered the question. "Install better security cameras for starters, and I'm not stopping the construction." George disappeared into the back room, returning with a box. "Military-grade security cameras. Waterproof night vision, uploads directly to cloud storage." When I reached for my wallet, he waved me off. "Consider it my contribution to justice. Your Claire was a good woman. She deserves to have her cabin built." With George's help, I installed the new cameras and ordered replacement materials. Working on the cabin had become my form of defiance. It was during one of these afternoons that Amber escalated things further. A small group of HOA members appeared at the edge of my property, holding signs about "protect property values" and "no rustic eyesores." They staged what they probably thought was a protest, taking photos and documenting my violations. I continued working, ignoring them completely. After an hour, they dispersed, but not before Amber called out, "We've filed a formal complaint with the county planning department, Matthew. This time, you won't be able to hide behind your position." The next day, I received an official notice from the planning department, signed by Maxwell Thompson, stating that my permits needed to be reviewed due to concerns raised by community members. I marched directly to Max's office. "What is this about, Max? You know every inch of that cabin plan is up to code." Max couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Matthew. Commissioner Davis requested the review personally. He plays golf with Scott Patterson." The pieces clicked into place. Amber was leveraging her husband's connections to pressure the department. As I left his office, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "We need to talk. I've found something interesting about the HOA's boundaries." By this point, the cabin was about 60% complete. The basic structure was up, the roof was on, and we were working on the windows and interior. Jessica had discovered through her research that the HOA had quietly expanded its boundaries 5 years ago without proper notification to all affected property owners, a legally questionable move at best. On a rainy Thursday morning, Max called me into an emergency meeting at the planning department. When I arrived, the conference room was filled with several officials, including Commissioner Davis. "Mr. Miller," he began, "we've received a formal complaint about your permit approvals. The complainant suggests there's a conflict of interest in you approving construction on your own property." I maintained my composure, explaining I had followed standard protocol with proper approvals by Senior Planner Roberts, not by me. Halfway through the meeting, my phone buzzed repeatedly. It was Lily. I stepped outside to answer. "Dad!" Her voice was panicked. "There are people here with trucks and equipment. They're tearing down the cabin. They said they have HOA authorization." My blood ran cold. "Lily, stay in the house. Call Jessica immediately. I'm on my way." I rushed back in. "Commissioner, while we've been sitting here discussing paperwork, the HOA has sent a demolition crew to my property without any legal authority. I broke every speed limit driving home, with Max following. When we arrived, a private demolition crew had torn down half the cabin's structure. Amber stood watching with satisfaction, Brett at her side. Lily was on the porch, tears streaming down her face, while Jessica argued heatedly with the crew foreman. "Stop this immediately," I shouted. "You have no legal authority to be on my property." The man pulled out a document with HOA letterhead, not a county demolition order. "This is not a legal document that authorizes demolition. You are trespassing and destroying private property." Max stepped forward, showing his county ID. "I'm the director of the planning department. No demolition permits have been issued for this address. You need to cease operations immediately." The foreman hesitated, looking between Max and Amber, who approached with practiced innocence. "There must be some misunderstanding. We were simply enforcing our HOA regulations." I turned to face her. "This property is outside your HOA jurisdiction. This is criminal trespassing, destruction of property, and fraud." Brett intervened, placing himself between us. "Watch your accusations, Miller. If you interfere with HOA business, we'll have the sheriff remove you." His threat was absurd. "Please," I said, "call the sheriff. I'd love to explain how you're demolishing property without a county permit." The confrontation escalated, with the demolition crew standing awkwardly by their equipment. Amber, seeing her plan faltering, changed tactics. "Fine, stop for now. But this isn't over, Matthew. The HOA board has unanimously voted that this structure violates our community standards." As if on cue, the remaining section of the cabin's frame collapsed, with a sickening crack, sending wooden beams tumbling toward the lake. Lily let out a small cry from the porch. I turned to Amber, my voice deadly calm despite my rage. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." She smirked. "We'll see about that." Later that evening, after filing reports with both the sheriff's department and county commissioners, I sat with Lily on the porch swing. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands clutching one of Claire's old sweaters. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do to stop them." I pulled her close. "You did exactly the right thing by calling me and Jessica. This isn't your fault." She looked out at the destruction, splintered wood, scattered materials, the partial foundation exposed to the elements. "Are we giving up?" she asked quietly. I followed her gaze to the ruined cabin, then to Claire's favorite maple tree nearby. "No," I said firmly, "we are not giving up. But sometimes, when you're fighting people who don't play fair, you need to change your strategy." I saw determination replace the sadness in her eyes. "Like chess? You taught me sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game." I smiled. "Exactly like chess, honey. And guess what? They just sacrificed their queen without realizing it." The weekend after the demolition, I converted our dining room into a war room. Jessica brought legal documents, and George contributed a whiteboard, where we mapped out everything about the HOA and its vulnerabilities. The original HOA boundaries from when Whispering Pines was established in 2003 clearly exclude the lakefront properties, Jessica explained, showing a faded map. Then in 2018, they filed this amendment that expanded their jurisdiction to include the lakefront, but without obtaining the required 75% homeowner approval. I nodded. "And my property falls right in that disputed area." Jessica smiled grimly. "Exactly. The amendment is legally questionable at best, fraudulent at worst. Monday morning, I arrived at the county offices early. As land permit director, I had legitimate access to all building records. I systematically reviewed every permit and inspection report for Whispering Pines properties over the past 5 years. By lunchtime, I had compiled a revealing list. Brett Wilson's unpermitted swimming pool without required safety fencing. Amber's basement gym conversion completed without electrical permits, and similar violations for 6 other HOA board members or allies. Even more interesting was Amber's recent application for an extensive home addition, an indoor pool and entertainment area that would extend beyond her property's setback requirement. The application should have been rejected immediately for multiple code violations, but it was being reviewed by a new hire who reported directly to Commissioner Davis, bypassing normal channels. That evening, Jessica called with her own discoveries. I've been talking to former HOA members who moved away. 3 different families mentioned financial irregularities during Amber's tenure. She's been using HOA funds for personal research trips to luxury resorts. One former treasurer resigned after questioning these expenses. Amber threatened to put a lien on my house because my garden shed was supposedly the wrong shade of brown, she explained. She's bullied half the neighborhood through intimidation and selective enforcement. George used his community connections to research the Pattersons' history. They've done this before. They lived in 3 different HOA communities, each time working their way onto the board, followed by aggressive enforcement and eventual conflict before moving on. They've been sued twice by former neighbors. Max Thompson requested a private meeting off county property. Commissioner Davis pulled me into his office before your permits were flagged, he confessed. He said Scott Patterson had concerns about your project and suggested it would be in the department's best interest to find problems with your application. I should have stood up to him, but my daughter just started college, and I can't afford to lose this job. This was serious. A county commissioner abusing his position for a personal vendetta? That night, looking at the cabin ruins, I considered my options. As land permit director, I had the authority to order inspections of properties with code violations. I had always used this power judiciously, but now, with documented infractions sitting on my table, I had the means to bring the HOA board's hypocrisy to light. Lily found me on the porch after midnight. Dad, remember what Mom used to say about bullies? That they're only powerful when people are afraid? I smiled. She was right, as usual. Lily yawned. So maybe it's time to show them we're not afraid anymore. The next morning, Lily showed me detailed drawings of a redesigned cabin. I've been thinking about how to rebuild it better, she explained. Her enthusiasm reminded me why this fight mattered so much. These are beautiful, honey, I told her, and we will rebuild it, she looked up. But first we have to deal with Mrs. Patterson, right? I nodded, turning to the whiteboard with our strategy. Yes, and I think it's time to stop playing defense. She followed my gaze to the list of HOA violations we had uncovered. Sometimes justice needs a little push from people who know how to use the system. Monday morning, I walked into my office with renewed purpose. I handed my assistant the first folder containing documentation on Brett Wilson's unpermitted swimming pool. This is for a safety inspection unpermitted pool lacking proper fencing, a serious violation with the elementary school nearby. By noon, official notices had been sent to Brett and 5 other HOA board members, or Amber's allies, all for legitimate violation. I made sure each inspection was assigned to our most thorough inspectors. Brett burst into my office that afternoon, waving the inspection notice. What the hell is this? I looked up calmly. Standard procedure for unpermitted structures, Mr. Wilson, especially those with safety concerns. He leaned over my desk. We both know what you're doing, Miller. This is retaliation. I maintain professionalism. Actually, it's enforcement of county building codes, something your HOA claims to value. Your pool lacks the required safety fence, has no self-closing gate with child-proof lock, and was built without proper electrical permits. These are serious violations that can result in a child drowning. The color drained from his face. The inspection is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. As he left, I heard him on his phone. Amber, we have a problem. The inspections resulted in violation notices for all 6 properties, with fines totaling over $20,000. They were given the same options they had presented to me: bring the structures into compliance or remove them entirely. Amber organized an emergency HOA meeting, which I attended with Jessica and about 30 other homeowners. Word had spread about the inspection crackdown. Amber stood at the podium, gesticulating dramatically. "This is a clear abuse of power. Matthew Miller is using his position to conduct a vendetta against board members who were simply enforcing our community standards." When she paused for breath, I raised my hand calmly. "May I respond to these allegations?" Approaching the front, I explained, "Every inspection was conducted according to standard procedures, based on documented code violations, the same standards the HOA claims to uphold." I turned to face the neighbors. "But there's a more fundamental issue. Many of you may not know that in 2018, the HOA board, under Mrs. Patterson's leadership, expanded its boundaries to include lakefront properties, including mine, without obtaining the required homeowner approval." Murmurs spread as I distributed copies of the original boundaries and the questionable amendment. This means not only was the HOA action against my cabin unauthorized, but it may call into question other decisions affecting properties in disputed areas. The meeting descended into chaos as homeowners questioned Amber about boundary changes and selective enforcement. Olivia Stewart stood up. "I think we deserve answers about how our dues are being spent too, especially if some went toward illegal demolition of property outside HOA jurisdiction." Amber's makeup couldn't hide her anger. "This meeting is adjourned," she declared, slamming down her gavel and storming out with Brett and a few supporters. The remaining homeowners clustered around Jessica and me, sharing their own stories of HOA overreach. By evening's end, 20 homeowners were willing to sign affidavits about Amber's mismanagement and intimidation tactics. The next morning, I sent a formal letter to every Whispering Pines household, detailing the boundary manipulation, financial irregularities, and selective enforcement under Amber's leadership. By lunchtime, Amber herself burst into my office. "You've gone too far, Miller," she hissed. "You think you can turn my own neighborhood against me? I built Whispering Pines into what it is today." I leaned back, unintimidated. "Actually, you've done a remarkable job of turning people against you all on your own. I'm just shining a light on it." She jabbed her finger toward me. "I will destroy your career. Scott is golfing with the county executive director this weekend. How long do you think you'll keep your job?" I opened my desk drawer and removed a thick file. "Before making more threats, you might want to look at this." I revealed hundreds of pages of documented violations, financial discrepancies, and sworn statements from neighbors. Her eyes darted over the pages, the reality slowly dawning. Her voice softened. "Matthew, surely we can work something out. Perhaps a mutual agreement could be reached?" She pulled out her checkbook. "The HOA could compensate you for the cabin, say $25,000, in exchange for dropping this misunderstanding." She didn't realize Jessica had provided me with a recording device capturing every word. "Are you offering me a bribe, Mrs. Patterson?" She quickly backpedaled. "Not a bribe. Compensation. For damages." I stood up. "I think this conversation is over. Please direct further communication through legal channel." Her face transformed back to rage. "You'll regret this, Matthew. I promise you'll disappear from this county for good." As she stormed out, I stopped the recording and immediately made digital copies. Later that day, I received notice from the County Ethics Committee that I was under investigation for potential conflicts of interest in permit approvals. The complaint was anonymous, but obviously from Amber, likely facilitated by her husband's connections. The investigation would temporarily restrict my ability to issue permits, including those related to the HOA properties I had just cited. As I drove home, I called Jessica. "They're trying to tie my hands. An ethics investigation can drag on for months." Jessica wasn't deterred. "Then we accelerate our timeline. I've prepared the injunction against the HOA based on the boundary manipulation, and with today's recording, we can add attempted bribery of a county official to the charges." I smiled despite the stress. "You know what Claire used to say about chess? The best players are thinking 5 moves ahead." Jessica laughed. "Well then, let's make our next move count." The county board meeting room was packed beyond capacity. The conflict of interest hearing regarding my permit approvals had become the most anticipated county government event in years. Amber and Scott Patterson sat in the front row, Scott in a tailored suit, Amber in a designer dress that clashed with her overdone makeup. Brett Wilson and other HOA board members clustered around them. On the other side sat Jessica, Lily, George, and at least 30 Whispering Pines homeowners supporting me, including Olivia Stewart. Commissioner Davis called the meeting to order, explaining the purpose of the hearing. Scott Patterson approached the podium and presented a narrative portraying me as a rogue official who abused my position. then retaliated against concerned citizens who maintained community standards. He painted Amber as a dedicated volunteer working to preserve property values, and the HOA as victims of my vendettas. When my turn came, I approached the podium calmly. Thank you, Commissioner Davis and board members, for the opportunity to address these allegations. I methodically dismantled the conflict of interest claim, presenting documentation showing my permit applications had followed proper protocols. I explained the timeline from the initial cabin construction to the HOA harassment, culminating in the illegal demolition. Then I pivoted. What we're really discussing is not a conflict of interest, but an abuse of power, not by me, but by an HOA that illegally expanded its boundaries and used intimidation tactics to enforce rules on properties outside its jurisdiction. Commissioner Davis attempted to interrupt. Mr. Miller, please limit your comments to the specific allegations. I nodded respectfully. With all due respect, Commissioner, these issues are inseparable. I proceeded to present evidence of the HOA boundary manipulation and addressed the targeted inspections I had ordered. As land permit director, it is my duty to enforce building codes equally for all residents. When I became aware of significant safety violations, I followed standard procedures, the same that would apply to any property in the county. Lily suddenly stood up. "Can I say something, please?" she asked. Commissioner Davis nodded. Lily walked to the front with remarkable poise. "My name is Lily Miller. The cabin my dad was building was my mom's dream before she died from cancer 3 years ago. It wasn't some big mansion that would block views or cause problems. It was just going to be a small place where we could feel close to her again." Her voice wavered slightly. "Mrs. Patterson and her friends came when my dad wasn't home and tore it down. They didn't care about the promise he made to my mom. They didn't care about how much it meant to me. They just wanted to win." The simplicity and emotional honesty of her statement hung in the air. Even Commissioner Davis seemed moved. The momentum seemed to be shifting when Scott Patterson requested to present new evidence. Documents suggesting I had fast-tracked permits for friends while delaying those for HOA board members. Amber looked triumphant. Commissioner Davis called a recess to review the materials. During the break, Jessica whispered, "Those documents look altered. The timestamps don't match our records." When the hearing resumed, I requested that the original digital records be pulled from the county database. A flicker of alarm crossed Scott's face. While an IT specialist was summoned, Jessica distributed packets to each board member containing documentation of the HOA's illegal boundary expansion, financial irregularities, and testimony about intimidation tactics. Additionally, I have evidence that Mrs. Patterson attempted to bribe a county official, specifically Mr. Miller, to drop legitimate code enforcement actions. She played the recording of my office conversation with Amber. The color drained from Amber's face as her own voice filled the room, clearly offering money in exchange for dropping the investigations. The IT specialist returned with the original permit records, which showed that Scott's documents had indeed been altered. "I'd like to know who accessed and modified these records," I said, looking directly at Commissioner Davis. During the next brief recess, Olivia Stewart approached with 5 other homeowners, requesting to speak about the HOA's management practices. When the hearing resumed, the dynamic had completely shifted. Board members now asked pointed questions about the HOA's actions rather than my supposed violations. Homeowners testified about Amber's selective enforcement, intimidation tactics, and misuse of HOA funds. The most damaging testimony came from a former HOA treasurer who had resigned over financial irregularities. Mrs. Patterson regularly approved reimbursements to herself for research trips to luxury resorts with no clear benefit to the community, he explained. When I questioned these expenses, I was removed from the financial committee. Amber's composed facade crumbled. She interrupted repeatedly until Commissioner Davis warned she would be removed if she couldn't maintain decorum. After 3 hours of testimony, the board went into closed session. When they returned, Commissioner Davis read their decision. Regarding the conflict of interest allegations against Matthew Miller, the board finds insufficient evidence to support these claims. All proper protocols were followed in the permit approval process. He continued, "However, the evidence presented today raises serious concerns about the Whispering Pines HOA's governance, boundary claims, and enforcement actions. The board is initiating a comprehensive investigation into these matters and is temporarily suspending the HOA's authority pending the outcome. Additionally, The board recommends that Mrs. Patterson step down from her position immediately. Amber stood up, her face contorted with rage. "You can't do this! We'll sue!" Commissioner Davis banged his gavel. "Mrs. Patterson, please control yourself or you will be escorted from the building." As the meeting adjourned, neighbors surrounded me, offering congratulations and support. Many apologized for not standing up to Amber sooner. Jessica was already discussing forming an interim HOA board with Olivia as the likely temporary president. Through the crowd, I spotted Amber and Scott making their way toward the exit, most of their former allies now avoiding them. For a moment, Amber's gaze met mine, her expression a mix of fury and disbelief that her power structure had collapsed so completely. I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected, just a calm certainty that justice had finally been served. The weeks following the county hearing brought rapid changes. The Pattersons faced multiple consequences. The county investigation uncovered over $30,000 in questionable reimbursements to Amber for research that appeared to be personal vacations. Brett Wilson and other board members received significant fines for building violations. Most satisfying was the civil judgment requiring the Pattersons to pay full restitution for the demolished cabin plus damages, nearly $70,000. Jessica had pursued the case aggressively, and the judge was particularly unsympathetic after hearing the recorded bribe attempt. Olivia Stewart stepped up as interim HOA president, working with a new board to revise bylaws and restore original neighborhood boundaries. "We're focusing on being good neighbors rather than property police," she explained at the first community meeting. Almost 80% of homeowners attended, a record turnout. I attended as a regular resident, offering occasional permit advice, but otherwise content to be just another neighbor. At the county offices, changes were happening too. Commissioner Davis had taken an extended leave of absence, following questions about his role in document tampering. Maxwell Thompson had been forthright about the pressure he'd faced, providing testimony that helped uncover the commissioner's involvement with the Pattersons. Max stopped by my office, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. "I wanted to apologize again, Matthew. I should have stood up to the commissioner from the beginning." I waved away his apology. "What matters is that you did the right thing in the end." He nodded, then smiled. "By the way, I signed off on your new cabin permits myself. Everything is in order whenever you're ready to rebuild." 6 weeks after the hearing, a for sale sign appeared in front of the Pattersons' house. Rumors spread that Scott had accepted a position in another state, a lateral move according to his update, though most suspected it was a retreat from reputation damage they'd suffered. Brett Wilson followed suit, putting his house on the market well below comparable properties, eager for a quick sale. As Jessica put it over dinner, it's amazing how quickly a power structure can collapse once people stop being afraid. Construction on the new cabin began in early spring, almost exactly a year after the original project started. This time I found myself with abundant help. George organized volunteers from his hardware store customers and my county colleagues. Neighbors offered assistance on weekends, some with construction skills, others bringing food for workers. Even Max Thompson showed up in old jeans and a t-shirt, ready to help with framing. What began as my personal project had transformed into a community effort, symbolizing the neighborhood's renewal. Lily confidently showed volunteers her designs, explaining her vision for different spaces. I often caught myself watching her with pride and wistfulness, thinking how much Claire would have loved seeing her this way. Jessica became a regular presence during construction, initially offering legal advice about easements, but eventually just bringing coffee and working alongside us. Our friendship had deepened through the conflict, evolving into something that felt increasingly like more than friendship. One evening, as we sat on the half-built porch, watching the sunset, she asked, "Do you ever think about how sometimes the worst things lead to unexpected good?" I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Claire used to say that life has a way of taking detours that end up exactly where you need to be. Jessica's hand found mine as we continued watching the sunset. Lily, spotting us from where she was arranging stones for a pathway, smiled to herself before discreetly moving to the other side of the construction site. By midsummer, the cabin was taking shape, a beautiful structure with large windows capturing the lake view perfectly. Claire's presence was felt throughout, from the color scheme she had once sketched to special touches Lily had incorporated from her memories. One afternoon, as I was installing window trim, George arrived with a special delivery, a handcrafted wooden sign reading "Miller's Promise," with Claire's favorite hummingbird etched into the corner. "It's perfect," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. The completed cabin's grand opening coincided with the Whispering Pines summer block party, a community tradition revived under the new HOA leadership. Neighbors wandered between the main festivities and tours of the finished cabin. Olivia Stewart, now officially elected HOA president, presented us with a beautiful wind chime. "We wanted something that would remind you of the community's support whenever the wind blows," she explained. As the celebration continued into evening, Jessica, Lily, and I found a quiet moment alone in the cabin. Lily hung the last of Claire's photographs, one showing all three of us laughing during a beach vacation years ago in a specially built recessed shelf. "Do you think Mom would like it?" she asked. I put my arm around her shoulders. "She would love it, honey. Every inch of it." Jessica squeezed my other hand. "I never had the chance to meet Claire, but I feel like I know her through this place. Her spirit is in every detail." Later that night, Jessica and I sat on the porch swing, watching the moonlight on the lake. "I've been thinking about how differently things might have turned out if Ember had just left your cabin alone," she said after a comfortable silence. I nodded, considering the cascade of events that followed that first hostile encounter. She never understood that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. I looked through the window at Lily, sleeping peacefully, Claire's photo watching over her, then back to the woman beside me. A relationship I never expected to find again. The cabin, yes, but more than that, promises, principles, community, the things that really matter. The following weekend, George stopped by with a final addition, a small wooden carving box. Once he was gone, I opened it to find a small wooden gavel with an inscription: "Justice sometimes requires knowing how to sign permits." I burst out laughing at the perfect encapsulation of our victory. The road to rebuilding the cabin had been far more difficult than I ever anticipated. What began as a simple construction project had evolved into a battle against corruption and abuse of power, followed by the rebuilding of not just a structure, but a community. Standing on the porch, looking out at the peaceful lake as the sun set, I felt Claire's presence more strongly than I had in years. "We did it," I whispered to the evening breeze. "We kept our promise." And somewhere in that moment, between the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the first stars appearing in the twilight sky, I could almost hear her reply, "I never doubted you would."
This story might be over, but QA Stories has a whole vault of mayhem waiting. Choose your next rabbit hole wisely.